This video just now was a wonderful introduction to what I want to speak to you about today, veg. Now, it was actually the second video because I want to talk to you about how you can combine two things that always drove me around, and that was how can you have fun on the one hand and still somehow better the world whilst you're at it. So, if we look at the first bit, how do you manage to better the world? How can you change behavioral patterns like the chap told us in his weekday veg thing? In short, how do you get people from driving one of the big ones to one of the little ones? Or how do you get people to go from a burger to a salad? Now, historically, there was one very, very simple approach to that, and that was shock and awe, if you wish. And all of you probably know it. It doesn't really work very well. You do it if there is really someone standing with a stick, but otherwise you're not really bothered. Now, this man had a slightly more subtle approach. He is Kemal Atatürk, the founder of modern Turkey. And Atatürk was a very secular man. And he thought that for a modern state to succeed, it was absolutely essential that religion didn't play any part in that state. Now, look at this as a symbol, right? So what he wanted to do is he thought, in order to achieve this in society, I need to make sure that people don't run around with religious symbols. And this is not only limited to veils or anything like that. This could apply to anything. How do you get a country, it's a Muslim country, how do you get people to stop wearing a veil? He made, and this is an anecdote, I couldn't prove it, but he made a law. And under this law, he made it obligatory for prostitutes to wear a veil. Imagine every pedophile in this country would be obliged to drive a Range Rover. The carbon footprint of Premiership footballers would go down rapidly, I swear. So basically, what this shows us, a stick works, but there's no carrot in there, right? Because Atatürk's approach was slightly more subtle than that litter and die sign, but he's still using the stick. He's still using a negative impact on people if they don't comply. Where's the fun in that? Because that was what I always tried to do. I thought, what is life if you can't have fun? Now, simple little problem for parents. You'll be there one day, maybe. So you have this room, and how do you get, it's probably a boy's room, whatever, how you get your son or daughter to clean it up? Rules do not tend to work. I know that from when I was a kid, and I know that from being a dad now. It doesn't work. Now, if one of these two, depending on your sexual orientation, would come to visit, I'm sure that room would clean up itself in no time. So basically, we know carrots work, right? Now, why is that so? Because there were, it might be a long shot with Sienna Miller and whoever the other guy was, it's a positive driver, to do that. And things giving you stuff in order, if you do something, they're old. We've seen them. You find them on the back of cereal packets. Weight Watchers tries that. You probably all know the Caffè Nero things, but it's a little lame. It's a little boring. It's sort of, it doesn't really drive you on. You do is I never collect these Nero things because I tend to forget them. Now here, however, there's a slightly more creative way of instilling fun and achieving something good at the same time. This is a staircase at a subway station in Stockholm. And what they did is they kitted it out like a piano keyboard. And if you watch very, very closely, I'm not sure if you can see it on the slide, but you'll see a couple of cables sticking out on the side, because what they also did is they put sensors underneath, and then they connected it to a sound system, and when you would walk across those stairs, they would actually sound like a piano. Now, we all know it's healthier to use the stairs than it is to use that escalator that's right next to it. And people rarely ever do it. use of that staircase increased 68%. No one actually said anything. There was no sign anywhere. There weren't people telling you what to do. There weren't people telling you that you would die of heart attacks and obesity and whatnot unless you would walk the stairs. But it was fun doing it, so they did it. Very similar thing. Couldn't find a high-res photo of this, unfortunately. It's a bottle bank, normal bottle bank. But they put a little arcade thing machine on top. So you get a high score, and then these lamps you see on top of those holes, they would flash up in random intervals. And so the quicker you would throw your bottle into that hole where the lamp was flashing, the higher your score was. There was another bottle bank just down the road. Apparently, over 80% of people used this one. Why? Because it's fun. And then we have this. This was one of the coolest things I've seen. This is the dashboard of the Ford Fusion Hybrid, or so, the US model. And you know, besides it being a very fancy dashboard because it's a modern hybrid car, it has one thing that you don't normally find on a dashboard, and that's this little plant there in the corner. Now, what that does is, it thrives or withers depending on how you drive. So the more economical you drive, the more the plant thrives. You put the pedal to the metal, it starts to wither. It probably never really dies because Ford wouldn't want that. Now, a couple of months back, I was in San Francisco and stepped into a cab that was one of those cars. And I was so excited about this because I had read about this thing and I had seen a couple of things about it. So I asked the cabbie, now, you know, besides this being a very cool gadget, you know, does this actually do something? And he said, yeah, you know, I actually do look. You know, it's like a Tamagotchi in my car, and I'm quite taken to it, so I wanted to do well. Now, all these things, you know, you think, well, okay, they're quite cool, but what do they do in the longer term, on the larger scale? Now, what I did then is I thought, let's look at this Tamagotchi in the car, and let's see what it does. There's 850 million cars in the world, roughly. Now, I assumed that the average mileage would be 20,000 miles per year. And I reckon that this will include everything from Australian road trains going up and down the country to my good self, who rarely ever drives. Now, the cabbie said he would save roughly 5 mpg, simply because this little plant thing, he didn't want to see it wither. Now, and that would equate to an annual saving of nearly 61 billion gallons. And that equals 56% of Saudi Arabia's annual oil output. All because of a little gamey, planty thing, Tamagotchi, digital toy in your car. It's of course a bit distorted because that would require that every car in the world would run around with one of those things. But nonetheless, the overall number is quite staggering. So I thought, okay, what more is there? You know, so this is fun stuff, and with a bit of creativity and ingenuity, you can probably, you know, come up with a couple of these cool things. But there are more. There are more tools, if you wish, you know, that are positive drivers that I think work. So, who's a fan of? I'm not talking of screaming whatever. I want you to stand up whenever a term comes up that might apply to you, okay? Ready? And it's running through quick. So, football, rugby, cricket, X Factor, come on. Next top model, what do we have? Britain's Got Talent, tennis, golf, netball, basketball, Formula 1 racing, X Games, Mega Ram, all the Red Bull stuff. Olympics, figure skating, come on, there must be figure skaters here. The boat race, Eggheads, Angry Birds, Xbox Live Arcade, Strictly Come Dancing. So by now, really, everyone should have stood. And the reason is, all these things have one little thing in common. They're all about competition in one way or another. It is, you either watch it or you participate in it, but it is about competition. And that concept isn't actually new. Now, here's another tool. You know, all these things I just described, they work much, much better with your friends, even if you don't tweet. You know, everything works better with friends. With groups that matter to you, where people, where you actually care what the people within this group think, feel, do. And, you know, sometimes if you have a lot of friends, it is even more fun. So here's another one that actually starts combining these things. Do you know what this is? There is a mayor of Fellybroom, I know that. These are icons from a little application that's called Foursquare. You might have read about this, it went through the press a lot, and it's a little app on iPhone and Android and whatnot phones that allows you to check in a place. And there can be a pub, a school, whatever it is. And that's really it. That's what you do. Now, they gave it a little twist, because the person who checks in most in any particular venue becomes its mayor. So you get that little crown. And then there's a couple of other awards that you can achieve. Now, I trained as a lawyer originally, so I still have a couple of lawyer friends. You know, these guys who are very sincere, and dark suits and all the rest of it. One of them is corporate partner in a big London law firm. The other runs HR for a large bank. Both of them changed their way to work. So they could check in the morning in their favorite pub because they're competing for the bloody mayorship. Yeah? And it might be only a little anecdote, but it is, again, you know, there's something fun changes the behavioral pattern. On a slightly more serious note, the Nike folks have, you know, you get this Nike Plus system where you buy a shoe and you put this little GPS thing into your shoe, and there's an iPhone app for it, and la-di-la-di-la, and then you can share it on Facebook. Now, you guys are probably all incredibly fit. When you get my age, every one of my friends who posts something, you know, of his Nike Plus run on Facebook gets the most encouraging comments you could possibly imagine. Way to go, buddy, you know, it's only another 2 miles to get the half marathon, etc., etc. Which does what? It's a positive driver to keep him going, right? Now, and then I thought I need something about schools here. Now, this is Professor Lee Sheldon, and he's a professor in Indianapolis, and I'll tell you in a moment of what. But he did one thing. He thought this whole bloody grading system, you know, A star and whatnot, that is ancient and it doesn't really do much. So he replaced normal school grades by XP, experience points. You level up. Now, he's a professor for game design. But what it did to his university course, and he measured this over a couple of years, it was attendance was up, performance was up, achievement was up, and that was across the board, all the students. It's one little thing, which in his case, of course, was a rather obvious one, because when you study game design, you probably know exactly what XP are. But again, he used a positive driver to change behavior, with no pressure at all, just, you know, by adding a little bit of fun and adding a positive driver to it. So these are the main tools we have in that respect. We know a carrot works, we have competitive piece, and we have the relation, the connection to friends. And now imagine what you could do if you apply it to any, you know, to any of life's little issues, and of life's big issues. If you think of the cars, you know, healthy eating, speeding or not, using public transport. The littering thing, similar, you know. There's so much you could do with that. What's next? And that is probably up to you guys to come up with. Thank you very much.